I always believed in marrying great product with great customer success and support to deliver those outsized returns to the customer. Continue to lead these functions, but at larger scale, right? So not just focused on 0 to 100 million in ARR, but 100 to a billion, for example. Or the other option was to expand the scope of responsibility at early stage companies. And that's what led me to the CEO role.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Zero to Exit. This is Ankur and Nilima. After 22 episodes into the show, one of the things we have figured out is that the time it takes to get a guest on the show is directly proportional to the number of exit the guest has had. It's for this reason it took us a while to have today's guest on the show, but we are so glad to have him finally. We're really excited to have Kamal Shah on the show. Kamal was the CEO of StackRox, who was recently acquired by RedHat on a very successful acquisition. He now runs the cloud platforms at RedHat. Prior to StackRox, Kamal ran products and marketing at Skyhigh Networks, a leader in CASB that was acquired by McAfee for a large sum. And just prior to that, he ran products and marketing at Clearwell, a leader in e-discovery that was acquired by Symantec. Kamal's got the golden touch. He has the unique combination of the product and marketing chops that's helped him build and sell category leaders. In today's show, we'll talk about category creation, transitioning from an operator role to a CEO, and the future of cloud and container security. Hey, Kamal, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ankur and Nilima. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, we're so glad to finally have you. I know it's a super busy season for you. But I want to kick us off by asking you, first of all, congratulations on the acquisition. The ink is barely dry on the acquisition. Super happy for you and the StackRox teams, and obviously for RedHat. You know, you've been part of obviously both the physical and virtual acquisitions. Love to hear from you. What's the M&A experience like in the virtual world?
Yeah, we closed the transaction officially on February 22nd. So it's been 2.5 months, and the integration and the transition has been going on very smooth. As you know, M&A is a process, and going through it virtually certainly has its trade-offs, right? On one hand, video conferencing is very time efficient and very comfortable, as I was in sweats most of the time. But on the other hand, you do miss certain in-person interactions, such as getting to know each other or communicating and celebrating with the team. But on balance, I would say that it was remarkably smooth and efficient.
Yeah, love it. Have you set a date for a physical party, or it's been all virtual so far for the team?
It's been all virtual so far, but I'm hoping that as more and more people get vaccinated, we'll be able to get together in person over the coming months.
Great.
Great.
So I want to start by asking you some questions on the category creation. At Clearwell, you were instrumental in creating the e-discovery space. At Skyhigh, you created CASB. We all know category creation is super hard. And we also know that at least in the security world, you can make big bucks by just selling better mousetrap. So first question there, why create a category and not build something incremental?
Yeah, so you are certainly right that there are plenty of vendors that drive innovation, or as you said, build a better mousetrap in existing markets, right? So recent examples are CrowdStrike in the EDR market, or Zscaler and the secure web gateway market, although these markets have also expanded to XDR and SASE respectively over time. And frankly, if you think about security and what's happening in security, it's no different than what we have seen in the broader IT market with Salesforce displacing Siebel, or Workday displacing PeopleSoft, and ServiceNow with BMC software, and so on. Right? And so, at the same time, there are new problems that need to be solved, driven by new technologies. And these are examples are mobile and cloud. And personally, I have always been interested in tackling new emerging problems versus tackling existing problems with a better mousetrap. So it's really a personal preference, and both provide opportunities to make a difference in the world. And I would say that it wasn't me, it was a team that really created these categories. And I have been very fortunate to work with some extraordinary individuals and be part of a team that was made e-discovery, a reality and a big market in today, or Caspi, which has now evolved into other markets, and with container and Kubernetes security at StackRox.
Yeah, yeah. One of the questions I had for you on that was when you were at Skyhigh. Obviously, we used to compete back in the days and got our behind kicked a few times. But like every time we'd be at RSA, Skyhigh would have the biggest booth, the biggest marketing presence. So one of the questions I have, like in the process of category creation, right? Like you got to get your word out there and really spend a lot of money, basically just AR, PR, all kinds of stuff. Like how do you balance that versus preserving cash? What are the like some of the 3 5 things you've learned in the process of creating these categories? Because the way you described it sounds simple, everybody should do it, but then people are not, because like inherently it's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, it is. It is hard. Category creation is hard for several reasons, right? One, you're solving a new problem. And with all new things, it takes us humans time to fully understand these new ideas, right? We create cognitive references for things, and it's hard for us to look for that white space in our brains to fully understand new ideas. So this is particularly challenging in security, as security professionals, as we all know, are swamped solving existing problems. So the first step is really to fully understand that new idea or the new problem. And then once we understand that problem, then we look for validation, right? We look for validation from peers, from analyst community, and from other vendors or competitors. And then finally, once we get the validation, then we look to answer the why now question, right? As a buyer, is this something I need to solve today, or can it wait till next year? Do I have budget for this? Do I have resources? Because oftentimes this budget and resources get set a year in advance, right? It's for all these reasons, category creation is hard and it takes time. And therefore, making investments and how and when to make those investments also is a difficult and challenging problem to solve. And it is, if you think about it, you have to start by customers who are early adopters and well respected by their peers, because that's an important step in the buying process for a new category. Having the analyst community aligned with that category is important. And as you know, when you're working with analysts, they have to hear the need to solve this problem from their end clients, right? They're not just going to listen to a vendor who says this is important. And then having like-minded competitors is important. And you mentioned Caspi, and in that space, there are several companies that were evangelizing the need for it, right? Skyhigh, Cipher Cloud, Netscope, Elastica, Atalom, CloudLock, and BitClass. So given that, when we were at Skyhigh, the decision that we were thinking about, or the considerations that we were going through from a go-to-market investment standpoint, is that the category is forming and the people are buying, there is a need for it. And so given competitors in the space, is now the right time to invest significantly in sales and marketing to capitalize on the market opportunity. And that's kind of what led to the investments we made in marketing and the big booth at RSA and so on and so forth. But at the same time, Ankur, I'll be honest with you, I have made the costly mistake of investing heavily in sales before I invested in marketing and before creating demand. And that led to a very poor sales efficiency in the early days, right? So it's always a balancing act about when do you invest, when do you not invest. And you can be right you won't be right 100% of the time, but you have to place certain bets and then reevaluate on a quarterly basis to see and learn from the market and where the market is, and then adjust your investments accordingly.
Kamal, are there any stories around that mistake that would be interesting for our listeners to hear?
Yeah, without getting into too many specifics, what we saw is oftentimes I speak for myself, I had happy years, right? So you see validation of the problem statement, you see customers saying, okay, we're going to move to a POC. And then based on that feedback, you say, okay, the market's happening, let's go invest heavily in sales. And I did that. And then what we realize is just because you did a POC doesn't mean that you're going to close a deal, right? There are budget constraints, there are resource constraints. And so we didn't lose those deals, but this POC to close conversion rate was low in the early days. And oftentimes it is low when you are early in that category creation.
Correct.
But if you, based on the early signs of first meetings and POCs, based on early part of the sales funnel, if you make investments in sales, you'll realize that you have a lot of activity, but it's not converting at the rate to get to the sales efficiency that you want to deliver, right? Now,
Mm-hmm.
it may be okay to do that, and you may decide as a company to say it's okay to have poor sales efficiency in year one or year two, and it will improve over time, but it's costly, right? And then you have to make that trade off. Now, in today's environment where valuations are at an all time high and capital is abundant, that trade off may be the right trade off for a company, or in some cases, it may not be. So it comes down to the individual company, the individual market, and what's the best decision that the company and the board feel will deliver the best outcome.
Got it. And did you need to pivot? Like, so let's say you started the marketing story after this. Was there ever a pivot in these startup journeys, which like you initially you thought this is where we are going, and then you literally had to pivot and change your story, even though addressing the same problem? Were there any scenarios there?
Yeah, and I wouldn't say it was a pivot, but it was more of a expansion of the story based on feedback from the market. So let's talk about Skyhigh for a moment. We started off focusing on shadow IT. I'm sure you'll probably recall those fun days. And and after focusing on shadow IT, what we noticed is that the market adoption for Office 365 was going through the roof, right? And people are focused on, okay, if you're using Office 365, migrating to Office 365, how do I protect my data? How do I make sure my DLP policies extend to the cloud? How do I make sure that we're not sharing data to personal email addresses, which could be a violation of your compliance policies and so on? And that led to a sanctioned IT story, right? And doing security for sanctioned IT, focusing on Office 365, and then expanding to Box and Dropbox and so on. And so it's more of an expansion, which naturally happens, where you start with a particular use case and then you expand those use cases to cover additional use cases. Similarly, at StackRox, we started with focus on containers, and then we expanded to focus on Kubernetes because we saw rapid adoption of Kubernetes as the de facto orchestrator of choice. So again, Lima, it's not a pivot necessarily, but it's just a expansion of the product or the solution suite based on response to them from the market.
Got it. Before we go off of the category creation, a couple more questions. So one of the things that, and you can validate it, that was in Skyhigh's playbook was customer referenceability. Basically, it was baked into the contract. How important it is to ensure that the customers that you land are referenceable, that you can market them, because in security there's a lot of secrecy. But you guys figured out early on, like, I got to have these reference customers. How important it is.
Yeah, so I think for any early stage company, customer references are extremely important. And so I think there are two elements to this. First, from a company standpoint, you have to create a culture of customer success. And both Skyhigh and StackRox, that was one of our core values was customers come first, or going above and beyond to exceed customer expectations, right? So it's extremely important. And that extends to not just delivering the product that delivers value to the customer, but making sure they're successful, they've operationalized the use cases that are important to them. And so I always believed in marrying great product with great customer success and support. to deliver those outsized returns to the customer. And so very early on at both Skyhigh and StackRox, we invested heavily in making sure that it was done as a product, but we also had a strong customer success and support teams. Now, referenceability becomes important because, again, as I mentioned earlier, in the category creation, when you get to the early majority, right, the bulk of the market and the late majority, they look for those validation data points, right, from their peers, and these are the
Absolutely.
early adopters. And having those early adopters serve as references is incredibly important. And not everybody will be publicly referenceable, but even if they're privately referenceable, that's okay. So you got to have both, combination of public and private references. And then in terms of how do you get them to be referenceable for security, where they don't necessarily want to disclose which tools they're using from a security standpoint. And I think one of the ways you can overcome this is by enabling a story where it's not so much about, hey, we are securing the enterprise, but it's more about we are enabling the enterprise. We're accelerating digital transformation.
I see.
And so it's the message that you're communicating, which is a positive message, right? So one of the CIOs who was one of our early customers at Skyhigh, he used to talk about Caspi as enabling him from going from a CI no, so you can't use this solution, and no, you can use this solution, to, hey, we are going to enable businesses to use whatever tools they want to use while providing the security layer. So it becomes a very positive enablement message as opposed to a security message.
Love it. One of the other things that I also wanted to ask you was that in the process of category creation, right? Like you have a couple of options. Come up with your favorite 2, 3, or 4 letter acronym and call that a category and let everybody else kind of follow that. Or sort of let the Gartner, which obviously has an outsized influence in our industry, attach to one of the 4 letter acronyms that they'll come up with, and then just say, hey, look, we've got the best solution in this one. How should one trade the two? How should somebody think about the trade-off between the two options?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ankur, and certainly something that I have wrestled with in the past. What I found is that there's a process that the analyst community goes through internally to come up with that acronym. And it's not as simple as one analyst coming up with and saying, okay, we're going to call this thing XYZ. They internally go through and they debate what the right name is with the other analysts in adjoining spaces, and they want to make sure that the name that you come up with is not going to create any confusion with the other categories that are out there, right? And because that confusion then creates confusion with the end customers, right? And nobody wants that. So there's a pretty thorough process they go through internally, and this is majority of the analyst firms, from what I understand, to come up with that name. So once they come up with the name, it's very hard for a vendor or a startup to go and change that name, no matter how hard you try, right?
Yeah.
And so in some ways, and if you have multiple vendors in the space, that everybody's going to have their version of the 3 letter acronym or 4 letter acronym, and then how do you decide between them? And so I have found that even if the acronym is not perfect, or if the category name is not perfect, going with what's already been written about by the analyst community can work. I mean, that's what we did, right, with Caspi. I mean, Neil McDonald wrote the seminal paper on Caspi at Gartner, and it was a category that was well defined. Similarly, you have similar categories in the container and Kubernetes security space with CWPP and CSPM, and just embracing that in the early days can be efficient. Now, when you get to, if there isn't a category already that exists, then you have an opportunity to be able to work with the analyst community to influence it and to come up with the right category. And kudos to Palo Alto Networks for doing that with next gen firewalls, right? So there are examples where that can work if that category does not exist. But if it exists, then you are, I think, as a startup, it can be a very efficient path to embrace that, as
Yeah.
opposed to try to create a new one.
Yeah. Isn't there a danger in that though, Kamal? Because the analysts will put the sum total of what all vendors do in that category. So everybody's chasing everybody else, which is, I suppose, good for the customers. But the vendors are losing their shit over this. Like, oh my God, like now I got to add like these five other features that I had no plans to do. Do you think it's good or bad, or that just how the world works and people must embrace it?
Yeah, I think, that's in some ways that's how the world works. But I think, if what the analysts say was the end all be all in a buying process, then nobody would sell anything, make any revenue outside of the leaders in the quadrant. But the reality is that every company that's in a magic quadrant, regardless of whether they're leaders or challengers or visionaries, they tend to have revenue, they tend to do well because not every vendor is a leader. And so I think it comes down to how do you go through a sales process and how do you work with the customers to understand, hey, what are your top use cases that you are trying to address? What are you going to operationalize over the next 2 or 3 years? Let's focus on that versus this long checklist of features, which you may or may not use. And then use that as a way to drive the proof of concept or proof of value, and use that as a way to drive the decision making process. So I think that there is well, it's certainly challenging, but and not all features are created equal. So if you focus on features that are really driven by priorities from customers, that even though you may not have all the features, you'll do quite well because you're really truly addressing a customer's pain point.
To that point, we've also seen Gartner change their mind, right? Casby started as a category, then it was not a category. They couldn't make their mind. We saw that in SOAR as well, and then the TAM size changed. So there are just so many moving targets that happen with that. But yeah,
Exactly. And these markets are evolving so quickly. They're changing so rapidly
Yeah.
that even if you do even if a quadrant comes out in 3 months, it's out of date,
yes,
right? Because you are constantly adding features. It's no longer a 6 or 9 month sales cycle. You're delivering a new release with new capabilities every 2 or 3 weeks now, if not faster. And so even these feature comparisons, right, you can become out of date. So I feel that the industry is changing. And what I've come to also appreciate is peer reviews and peer feedback, right? So Gartner Peer Insights or G2 Crowd or Trust Radius and feedback from end users on the product and on customer success and support becomes extremely important. And what we are beginning to see is that those reviews are being heavily relied upon, in addition to analyst reports, as customers make buying decisions. So I don't know, Ankur and Nalima, if you see that, but we certainly see that as becoming an important part of a go to market motion.
totally. We see that as the consumerization of enterprise is happening. We definitely see that. And we also see the users having a say a lot in buying the products, not just the buyers, for sure. Okay, so I'll move to now your CEO story. You joined StackRox as their CEO not too long after leaving Skyhigh. Was being CEO always your aspiration or something you grew into?
Yeah, one of my favorite books is Mindset by Carol Dweck, and I don't do it well, but I try to continually grow both personally and professionally. And so, after leading products and marketing at Clearwell and at Skyhigh, I wanted to continue to grow in my career. And as I thought about it, the two options that I could think of were A, continue to lead these functions, but at larger scale, right? So not just focused on 0 to 100 million in ARR, but 100 to a billion, for example. Or the other option was to expand the scope of responsibility at early stage companies. And that's what led me to the CEO role. And I was very fortunate to be introduced to the StackRox opportunity by RF at Sequoia, the team was super impressive, and I was convinced of the market opportunity, which was driven by the shift to microservices, containers, and Kubernetes. And that's what led to the CEO role.
Very good. What is the biggest mind shift you had to undergo from a operator role to now? Like you gotta conduct the orchestra.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate to learn from two incredible CEOs, Arif Hilali, who was a CEO at Clearwell, and then went on to be a partner at Sequoia Capital and is now a partner at Bain Capital Ventures, and Rajiv Gupta at Skyhigh Networks. They both are dear friends and mentors. And so I honestly felt that I was as prepared as one can be. That said, the biggest adjustment that I had to make is being able to constantly context switch and make decisions quickly. I mean, you touch all aspects of a business, every day. And if you look at your calendar, there's HR, sales, marketing, business development, partnerships, product, engineering, customer success, customers, you name it. And and you have to context switch within minutes to focus on the topic at hand, and then you have to make decisions on a multiple times a day across those different areas. And so that to me was the biggest adjustment that I had to make.
Love that. And actually, I was going to ask you that same very question. Like, how do you prioritize? Because biz dev, marketing, sales, CS, product engineer, everybody wants a piece of you. How do you ensure that you're focusing on the right things, the important, the urgent things, and delegate the rest? Is it just something, are there any playbooks for this or just kind of learn on the job?
It's really hard to have a playbook, but I have a framework that I have used. So the reality is you're going to end up spending time across the board. The question, as you're asking, Ankur, is where do you spend more time, or where do you spend relative to other areas, right?
Yep.
And so to me, there are certain things that you have to spend time that are always important. They should always be on the top of the list as a CEO. And in my humble opinion, those are people, culture, recruiting. They are extremely, extremely important, and because they really touch everybody in the company, and they can have outsized returns, right? So that to me is a constant. And I often think about how much time am I spending every week on those areas. Like I used to have, and I still do, at least three skip level conversations every week with team members, and just to kind of understand, how are they thinking about the company, what are they working on, and and asking some very basic questions is like, what can I do to help them be more successful, more effective, right? And so it's not about talking to them to understand what they're working on, but understanding how you can help them what can you do to make them more successful, right? Remove an obstacle, make a decision, whatever the case might be. Beyond that, what I've tried to do is to focus on, what are the top three priorities for the business? And those change from month to month and quarter to quarter. So having a clear sense for what are the most important things for the business this quarter, and then making sure that you're spending a good chunk of time on those priorities. And for that matter, not just you, but also your leadership team, right, becomes important.
It's interesting you should say, number one thing is people culture and recruiting. As I'd like to often say, like in startups, you're always in wartime. There's always a customer churning. There's always a deal you got to make to finish your quarter. How do you keep that perspective on when like you're constantly in wartime mode where you have to ask your people to work on the weekend and sometimes be a little bit standoffish? Because the folklore in startup in Silicon Valley is that, I mean, you see hard charging CEOs and entrepreneurs. How do you not lose perspective given that you're always in wartime in startup world?
It's a good question. What I found is that you can always be doing more as a startup, right? You could always be growing faster. You could be recruiting faster, and so having some perspective to say, okay, this is what we're trying to do, and having some sense of balance. I guess I would say that what I've tried to think about is, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint.
Yeah.
Burnout is a real issue, particularly over the last 12 to 15 months because of the pandemic. And so, knowing that, and knowing there will be times to do work weekends and charge and work hard, but also having some form of balance and encouraging people to take a break and take time off becomes important. And it comes with having a long-term perspective, and saying that, hey, look, this is, we're going to build a meaningful company here that makes a difference in the world, and let's keep that in mind and work towards that. I will also add that, one of the things that I found, and everyone talks about this, right? Everyone says that being a CEO is a lonely job, but you really don't know what it means until you are in that seat. It is a very lonely job, and having a coach or a mentor can be, yeah, very, very effective and very helpful, I should say. So I joined 10x CEO, where you work with a coach, and you are in a group of CEOs who you can lean on for advice, for support. And that was extremely valuable for me, and I highly recommend that.
What was that again, Kamal? CEO support group kind of thing? Sorry, never heard
Yeah,
of that before.
yeah, it's called 10x CEO.
Okay, got it.
And if you go to 10xceo.com, you'll see it. They have, CEOs from some of the leading companies that you hear about today, like Outreach, HashiCorp, Databricks. And what they do is, based on the size of your company, they put you in a group of relevant peers, because the idea is that you will be facing similar issues, similar challenges, right, based on the size of the company. And you can seek advice from them, right? These are fellow CEOs who are going through and experiencing similar shared experiences as you, and they're brutally honest with each other and providing feedback and guidance and support to each other. And that they also assign you a coach who works with you as well. And I think the combination of the two is very effective. And I certainly have benefited tremendously from that.
Yeah, not everybody gets to have a Bill Campbell, so it's good to have that kind of support group.
Yes, yes, indeed.
Does the coaching also help with the personal journey, Kamal? Because yes, the peers will help us with the operational aspect, but we all are come from product background. Moving from product to CEO, as you said, is a big personal jump as well.
Yeah, so I think that coach was extremely valuable in being a great sounding board and helping you think through it. And then, of course, you go through multiple highs and lows every single day. And as you were mentioning earlier, Ankur, you lose it. It's a deal. You're trying to close a candidate. Somebody quits. So these highs and lows happen, multiple times a day, and it helps to have perspective that that's part of the journey.
Yeah,
And don't take your highs too seriously. Don't take your lows too seriously. And as long as you're directionally, moving, making progress, that's really what matters at the end of the day.
yeah, and it's really encouraging to see a lot of the up and comer CEO, the very successful one, seems to have that psychological aspects down. Like you look at Toby from Shopify, Square CEO. Obviously, Jack Dorsey is a Zen master himself. So I think it's possible to managing psychology as well as kind of doing this, but really having a sounding board goes a long way. Yeah.
Yeah, and with a coach, because they have seen this movie through different CEOs, it's always refreshing to hear, look, it's not the end of the world. Let me tell you three other examples, right? Without sharing any confidential data or without sharing names. And so sometimes it helps to hear that, to kind of say, okay, it's, this too shall pass, and you focus on tomorrow. Yeah.
Totally. So we'll continue with the StackRox journey. StackRox just had a very successful exit when it was acquired by RedHat. And Twistlock was acquired not too long ago by Palo Alto Networks. What's making container security such a hot market right now?
Yeah, this is going to sound like a StackRox pitch, and I apologize for that, but it is truly reflective of what is happening here. So Mark Andreessen famously said that every company is a software company, and there is a fundamental shift that is happening in the way we write applications. We're shifting from monolithic applications to cloud native architectures with microservices, containers, orchestrated to Kubernetes. And if you look at even CNCF data, Kubernetes is now used by 91% of organizations, and 83% of them are using it in production. So it's no longer just in a test bed. And that shift is what's creating the tailwinds for container and Kubernetes security. And I can't stress enough the importance of tailwind when you are in a new category. Like even in the CASB world, Ankur, the tailwinds for us were the rapid adoption of SaaS, right,
Yep.
which led to shadow IT. And then for sanction IT, it was really the rapid adoption of Office 365, right, where the CIO makes a decision to go, we're going to go move to Office 365, and then all of a sudden security is like, okay, we got to sell, security for Office 365, right, and or collaboration tools like Box or Dropbox or Slack. And so I often look for tailwinds that's going to propel the market forward. Because as a startup, there's only so much you can do, right? But these tailwinds are mega forces. And as a very smart VC once told me, and the importance of tailwinds, like, you could have the America's Cup boat, but without any tailwinds, it's not going to go anywhere,
Yeah.
right? And with the right tailwinds, even a dinghy will fly, right? So that's the importance of tailwinds. And I think it's really those tailwinds, Nalima, to answer your question, that's really driving the growth and in container and Kubernetes security.
Yeah, yeah, there's a tailwind, all right. I mean, recently you've got several new startups, obviously, in addition to all the M&A, like Wiz and Orca, Laceworks getting $5 billion valuation, ungodly amounts of money, some stuff that we haven't seen before. What's your overall perspective on the market? This is good for the industry. The froth is going to be there, and then things will settle down. But it seems like a new game altogether, one that we are all not familiar with.
Yeah, like I'm not an expert by any means, but it is clear that the market is frothy, right? And it appears, as I speak to friends in the industry, it appears that it is driven by at least two factors. There may be other factors at play here. Yeah. Factor number one is really that public valuations are at an all-time high. Although the Nasdaq has sold off about 30% from its peak, I think, in the last few weeks, but public valuations are crazy, and that's filtering down to private valuations. And the second is what I've heard folks refer to as the Tiger effect, where hedge funds like Tiger Global are investing in Series B and Series C rounds as opposed to D, E, and F rounds, right? So they're moving early and they are investing, writing big checks, and they're driving, at high valuations, right? So that's really, I think, there's a couple of factors at play. There may be others at play, and we've seen this movie before with valuations being crazy, and they will eventually return to some sense of normalcy. Now, I don't know what the new normal is, but it feels like it will come down to some sense of reality. And in the meantime, I think it's very smart for entrepreneurs to take advantage of this market and build the war chest with little dilution. And so that said, with Wiz and Orca, Laceworks, Aqua, Systix, Sneak, all sitting at over $1 billion valuations, it will be interesting to see how many of them are able to go public and deliver a meaningful return to their stakeholders.
Yeah, fun story about Tiger Global. Now that you mentioned, somebody told me, and I read somewhere, it was named Tiger because their founder was really lousy with names. So he used to call everybody a tiger, like, "Hey Tiger, hey Tiger," and they ended up naming the. But yeah, definitely outsized influence of the private equity hedge funds in our market.
Tiger moving to B and C rounds, right? So then you have those growth investors who are now saying, okay, we need to do A's and B's. And then you have early stage investors saying, okay, we need to do seeds. And now the seed investors are doing pre-seed, right? So it's just creating a ripple effect in the entire market.
Totally. On
Yeah.
a related question, Gartner recently published a paper attempting to describe convergence of this whole bunch of CASB, CSPM, CWP. What's your take on that? Will there be more froth, or actually will it die down?
Uh, convergence, as I think about convergence, I think about putting myself in our customer shoes, right? So as a CISO, I mean, your attack surface is constantly evolving and expanding, right? With DevOps and the pace at which companies are driving innovation, are wanting to drive innovation in the market. You have more tools, more alerts than you know what to do with, and you're trying to make sense of it all. So I think some form of convergence is inevitable. And I also feel that, whether that's all these different markets coming into one or a subset of those is TBD, right? As the market evolves. I also think that security will become more decentralized. So we're already seeing this with DevOps and DevSecOps, where developers are taking responsibility for security of their applications, much like they have responsibility for performance of their applications, right? So shift left security is real and is much needed, and I think we'll continue to see that in other areas of the market as well.
Got it. So I'll ask our last question before we go into the rapid fire, Kamal. You've done product, marketing, run a company, and by all objective measures have had a very, very successful career. Having said that, what would you do differently knowing what you know now about having a much more successful and fulfilling career?
I've been very fortunate, Nalima, to owe a great deal of gratitude to my former colleagues, current colleagues, my family, who have provided me with advice, guidance, encouragement, and support over the years. My one advice, and it's not so much about having a more successful career, but my one advice would be to enjoy the journey. Many of us, myself included, were very focused on achieving one milestone after another milestone. And as I reflect on my career, the memories that I fondly recall are not of the milestones that I accomplished, but of the journey, of the moments you experience every single day. And so to me, it's enjoying the journey that would be one advice for our listeners today.
Thanks, Kamal. That brings us to our final session. We call it rapid fire. We got quick few questions that we'd love to get your perspective. Are you ready for this?
Let's do it.
All right. What's the biggest SaaS or security category that has not been created yet?
Workflow platforms. So next gen workflow platforms. So we've seen the first advent of that with RPA tools, but they're automating not basic, but common workflows. And I think there are there's a long tail of workflows in an organization where there's an opportunity to automate them. And I think there are a couple of interesting companies that I've heard recently that are tackling that problem, and I think that will become huge as we look to drive the next wave of productivity.
Love it. This is closer to Nilima's heart as well. I'm sure she's glad to hear that.
Sorry, my
All
ears
right.
were all open. I was like, yes.
All right. What's your prediction for the security market in the next 3 to 5 years? More specifically, do you see more fragmentation, more consolidation? Are we still going to have like 3 to 5,000 vendors, or do you think it's going to shrink?
I think it's going to be a combination of both. I think we will see consolidation in the market for sure, where larger players continue to buy emerging companies. At the same time, there will be many more new startups entering the market as well. So the total number of companies may stay the same or may increase, but there will be a lot more consolidation as well.
Okay, love it. You recently tweeted about reading the Think Again book by Adam Grant. From the book, or in general, what's your number one hack to keep learning, to have that growth mindset?
It's reading. Is
Yeah.
you have to read, you have to be disciplined to carve out time every day to read. And I'm still amazed that folks like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett or even presidents like Bill Clinton and Barack Obama took the time to read every single day despite all their demands of their time, given what they do. And that's it's a growth opportunity for me because I don't do it well today, but it's something that I'm trying to be more disciplined about and try to set a bar of reading a book every couple of weeks at the very least. So after Think Again, I started reading In Defense of a Liberal Education by Fareed Zakaria. So I have a 17-year-old, and as we're starting to think about colleges, which is a fascinating read, I'm almost done with it. So look for a tweet on that book to follow shortly.
Which other book is on your to-do list?
So the other book that I have is by Nicole Perlot, which is very close to the industry that we are in. And if I recall the title exactly, This is How They Tell Me the World Ends. And she chronicles all the different security breaches. I've just started reading it, and she talks about, what happened in Eastern Europe and the Russian hack and the Iranian nuclear hack. And she chronicles in detail some of the major cybersecurity attacks and implications for our world.
If you get to have only one skill, one soft skill, there's only one item on the menu, which soft skill would you recommend for yourself and for others?
I would say it would be being an effective communicator.
Okay.
And within that, if I had to prioritize, I would say being effective with written communications more than verbal or oral communication. So being able to write effectively, because I think writing is what makes you have clarity of thought. It teaches you how to learn, how to absorb, and how to communicate that back to others on paper. So that would be my number one soft skill.
And if you could shadow one CEO, who would that be?
Oh gosh, there are so many CEOs I admire, but if I were to pick one today, it would be Satya Nadella at Microsoft, just given the transformation that he has driven at Microsoft. And I just love his leadership style and the way he's been able to deliver impact.
Awesome. That wraps up this episode of Zero to Exit. Kamal, it's been a pleasure to have you on the podcast. We really appreciate you taking the time. Best wishes as you help RedHat reach new heights in cloud security.
Thank you so very much, and thank you for having me.